Subscribe now for daily United Kingdom entertainment news. BBC to explore how to reform licence fee. Director General says the BBC's Director General Tim Davie has announced that the corporation will explore how to reform the licence fee. Davie said the BBC will proactively research how to reform the licence fee post-2028, looking at its scope, how progressive it is and its enforcement. In a speech on Tuesday, Davie said, "It is right to ask fundamental questions about its longevity." But he added, "We should be cautious about unpicking a multi-genre BBC that leads the market." In a wide-ranging speech, Davie suggested the BBC would begin looking at ways of making it more affordable to people on lower incomes and how it's applied and enforced. He said the approach to reform needs to be careful and cautious and rejected the idea of the BBC being reduced to a paywalled subscription service, or abandoning the breadth of its programming. "We should not create another commercial walled garden or a narrow BBC that provides a niche service for the most hardcore users. The very wonder of the BBC is that quality news sits next to genres such as drama and sport, thus ensuring widespread usage." The BBC review will look at the issue of making it fairer for those on low incomes, but he said the corporation is committed to a universal fee where everyone has a stake in it. Davie said next year the broadcaster will open up our biggest ever consultation process so the public can inform and drive the debate on the future of the BBC. The background to the speech is the wider question of where the BBC goes from here. Traditional viewing of scheduled television is in decline, and the competitive landscape with players such as Netflix, Disney, TikTok, and YouTube has transformed viewing habits. The size, scope, and funding of the BBC is reviewed by the government in a process called Charter Review, and the next charter will be agreed by the end of 2027. This is an indication of how the BBC will argue for the continuation of its role and funding. Speaking of funding, Davie said the BBC's income had effectively fallen by around 30% between 2010 and 2020, and that the annual savings target would now rise by £200 million to £700 million a year by 2028. He said that saving would ensure we can deliver enough impactful content and ensure investment in digital products. Expanding on what he meant by the BBC exploring how progressive the license fee is, he said, "What I was signaling is, as we look at the license fee going into the future, you know what exactly it covers. It covers live television at the moment, etc. How many people get a free license? All those things we should be open-minded about. More resources will be moved out of programming on the broadcaster's traditional TV schedules into content that will streamed." He also criticized cuts to the BBC in real terms in recent years. To strip money from the BBC during this period has been particularly short-sighted, after below-inflationary settlements have chipped away at our income over many years. But he also acknowledged that the BBC now has an inflation-linked agreement until the end of the current BBC charter. Davie also said the long-term funding of the BBC World Service ought to be paid for by the government. The cost of the World Service was paid for by the Foreign Office until 2014. Since then there have been varying levels of grant support from the government, but it is at the moment largely paid for by the license fee. "We cannot keep asking UK license fee payers to invest in it when we face cuts to UK services," he said. Last week the government announced an expert panel who will advise it on how the BBC should be funded after the charter. "Now is the time when we must make choices to rapidly modernize and invest in precious institutions like the BBC, or they will wither," he said. He added that he was not defensive about the future, and acknowledged that the market has changed hugely since the license fee was introduced. Davie said he also agrees with a politician who said the BBC does not have a God-given right to exist, which is why the corporation must transform again. However, he recognized the BBC's proven record of reshaping itself to stay relevant through major industry changes. He pointed out that the BBC remains the UK's #1 media brand, with 9 out of 10 adults using its services at least once a week. Globally, it has a weekly audience of nearly 450 million. Answering questions after his speech, Davie said he wants to fight for universal funding, but the exact mechanism is open to the consultation. On April 1st, the TV license fee will rise by £10.50 per year to £169.50. Davie also set out an ambitious plan that he said focused on 3 roles: pursue truth with no agenda, back British storytelling, and bring people together. Talking about the future, Davie said the BBC will more actively utilize commercial partners and continue to aggressively grow BBC studios internationally. We aim to double studios in 5 years to deliver over £3.2 billion in revenues by 2027-28. He said. BBC Studios is the commercial arm of the BBC. It most recently made a deal with Disney, which is now a co-producer of Doctor Who. Last week, the corporation announced plans to carry adverts on its podcasts in the UK for the first time. Ads will appear on commercial platforms, but not